You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's start off with the offense, and there are two players that are returning on this offense that I believe cracked the top five, and that is, first of all, Oronde Gadsden, a 6'5", 240-pound tight end with 2 years of eligibility remaining, and the depth chart was recently released for Syracuse Football, and to nobody's surprise, he is the starting tight end for this team. Oronde Gadsden is someone who made preseason All-ACC, and keep in mind, the preseason All-ACC team was just one team, meaning that he was voted as the best tight end, at least in the preseason, the best tight end in the conference, and for good reason. Obviously, last year, he only played about a game and 5 minutes. He got hurt very early against Western Michigan. But in 2022, Oronde Gadsden was first team All-ACC and had a Syracuse tight end record of 969 receiving yards. That's pretty impressive stuff, right? Oronde Gadsden is back once again for this team. I'm so excited to watch him play in just 5 days because this is someone who can be an All-American caliber player. In my mind, he is the best player on the team. So spoiler to the final list segment, he is going to be number one on this list. Bottom line, he's the best tight end in the ACC, and he's one of the best tight ends in the country. If I had to give a final stat prediction, I do think that Syracuse does have more weapons than it did in 2022. So there's one category where I think he'll go down in. I think he's going to have slightly more catches than he did in 2022. So I'll go with 65 catches for Oronde Gadsden this year. And keep in mind, I'm only going to say in 12 games. I'm not going to count the bowl game. So in 12 games, Oronde Gadsden will have 65 catches, which is just a little over 5 a game. He'll have 900 yards, which is slightly lower than what he did in 2022. But here's where I see the increase coming. The touchdowns. He didn't have as much as you think in 2022. Off the top of my head, I believe he only had 6 touchdowns in 2022. So I'm going to say for this season, he's going to have 10 or more. How about that? Oronde Gadsden will have at least 10 receiving touchdowns this season. And if I'm going to be even bolder, I think he's going to have 2 touchdowns against Ohio in about 5 days. Why? I don't know. I just got a gut feeling. All right. Oronde Gadsden for 2 touchdowns against Ohio in week 1 because I'm so excited to watch him play. So that means he's definitely going to do well. And he's going to have 10 or more this upcoming season. So Oronde Gadsden leads us off on the offense returning players who cracked the top 5 on my list of overall returning players on this team for Syracuse football. Let's move on to the second player on offense that made the top 5. And that is LeQuint Allen, a 6', 195-pound running back with 2 years of eligibility remaining. He was second team All-ACC last season, but he didn't crack the preseason All-ACC team, but that's okay. He's still definitely someone who can make All-Conference once again. Remember, that was only the first team that was listed out in the preseason poll. Last season, he was really good. Remember, he took over for Sean Tucker, who was outstanding in his time on the Hill. And that's big shoes to fill. Someone like Sean Tucker, who set a single season rushing record for this team just a few years ago. And I thought LeQuint Allen did a very, very solid job for this team last year. Obviously, second team All-ACC. Of course, he did a great job, right? He had over 1,000 yards. He caught 38 passes, and he also went for about 200 yards in the air as well. So 38 catches for 200 yards. I phrased that weird for some reason. The one area where he can really improve on, because he's pretty well-rounded, right? He can run between the tackles. He can run outside. He can catch passes. The one area of improvement is the yards per carry. Last year, he was at 4.3, which for the NFL is pretty good, right? If you're an NFL running back running for 4.3 yards per carry, that's good. But for college football as an elite running back, that's maybe on the lower end. You want to see it kind of creep into the upper 4s, into the 5s. Even the best of the best will have like a 6, but I'm not expecting that this upcoming season for LeQuint Allen, but that's where he can really improve. And I think he has a good shot of improving that because his stats are really way down from what happened in the bowl game last season when he had 20 carries for 2 yards. So that really skews his yards per carry. And I believe when I mentioned this a few weeks ago on the podcast, I said that LeQuint Allen's yards per carry going into that game was probably around like 4.7, 4.8, which is still room for improvement, but solid. Then he has 20 carries for 2 yards. Now you're down to 4.3. So I think he can really improve there. My stat prediction for LeQuint Allen this upcoming season, I don't think he's going to see the same volume that he had last year. Last year, he had over 240 carries in 13 games. So I'm only going to give a 12-game prediction here, but I'm going to say 210 carries. So that's going to be less carries per game, but I think he'll be more efficient. So let's say over 1,100 yards. That's over 5 yards per carry. And I'm going to say 7 rushing touchdowns. I think that's a fair number because I think Yassine Willis is going to vulture some touchdowns, particularly near the goal line, right? The depth chart recently came out. I'm actually recording at the time it just came out. So I saw that Yassine Willis is listed as one of the backup running backs. That's not a surprise to anyone, really. So I think Yassine Willis, the true freshman, will take some touchdowns away from LeQuint Allen. As far as a receiving stat prediction for LeQuint Allen, let's go with 30 catches, so a little bit lower than what he did last year, but for more efficiency. So we'll say 200 yards. And the reasoning for that is because, well, their other backup running back is Will Nixon, the transfer from Washington, who is a very solid receiving back in his own right. So you might be asking yourself, why am I predicting LeQuint Allen to probably have lesser numbers than you might imagine? It's not due to LeQuint Allen's talent. LeQuint Allen is a bell cow back. He can play all 3 downs. But the best part about this team, at least on paper, is that they look much deeper than in years past. So this stat prediction is not an indictment on LeQuint Allen or Oronde Gadsden. I just think that there are a lot of weapons. There are a lot of mouths to feed. And so overall, LeQuint Allen can play all 3 downs. He can. Absolutely. He did last season. He was second team All-ACC. But with Yassine Willis being a backup power back and Will Nixon being a backup receiving back, at least for early in games, you don't have to play LeQuint Allen all 3 downs. You can have LeQuint Allen on first and second down. If you want, if it's second down and 1, you can put in Yassine Willis, even on second down, right? So LeQuint Allen doesn't have to play as much, but I think he's going to be much more efficient than he was last season. So the 2 players on offense that made my top 5 list of returners for Syracuse football are Oronde Gadsden and LeQuint Allen.